Welcome back to the channel, folks. Tonight we're going to be talking about layer masks. No, not layers of masks, layer masks. But if you think about it, layer masks are a lot like layers of masks. If you have on too many, one of them is covering up something else. If you use different opacities,
you can start to see through the first layer and see through to the bottom layers. And if you have multiple layers, multiple opacities, and multiple layers over your base image can help you create the final file that is what you're really after. Layer masks are a really important tool. I use them in almost every image I do. And so tonight I'm going to explain the how of using layer masks. And I'm doing this because one of my viewers asked me to go over the how of using layer masks. Sure, there are plenty of other places on YouTube and the internet where they could get that answer, but they're one of my viewers and they asked me to cover it. I'm going to go over the how of using layer masks. I'm also going to show you how to set up quick keys for creating layer masks. Because I use them so much, I've set up a quick key that helps me get to that function very quickly and saves me a lot of time in my workflow, especially if I'm using multiple layers on the same image. Sometimes it can get a little tedious. So I've set up a quick key that I'm going to show you how to do that, and we're going to go over the use of layer masks a little bit tonight on the channel. So let's stop fooling around with these silly masks and go on back up to the studio and get to work. Alright, tonight we're going to start with an image that didn't make the episode last weekend, because I just didn't have enough time for it. But it's an image I really like, so we're going to use this one tonight for talking about layer masks. As you can see, I have two different images here. One of them is at 0.6 seconds, and the other one is at 1 second. The problem with the 1 second is that there's some motion in the leaves over here on the far side of the riverbank that, when viewed at 100%, you can kind of see the little bit of motion in those leaves, particularly the ones right in here in the ferns and right over here. Those moved, whereas in this exposure, those were much more still and they didn't have the same motion in them. So we're going to use these two images and blend them together in Photoshop using layer masks. As always, it is important to make sure that your develop settings are the same from one image to the next. Scrolling between the two of them, it should look very similar or the same. Once you've got all of your develop settings coordinated and set up, it's time to export them over and open them in Photoshop. And I always go to Edit In, Open as Layers in Photoshop. Alright, now that we have them both in Photoshop, I try to rename them so that I know which one was which. And this is the shorter exposure, and this is the longer exposure. And I always try to put the one that I want to blend the most of on the bottom. And in this case, that's going to be the shorter exposure. I'm going to leave most of it visible and not see most of this longer exposure. So this is what it looks like without that longer exposure. And what I'm really going to be focusing on is bringing in some of the water right in here and right in here and right through this area. That I liked that water flow just a little bit better. In the shorter exposure, I really like these tails right here through that water. But I like this little bit right here, and I like the way that's moving around obstacle in the water a little better. I don't really like how blown out this got in the longer exposure. I like how it's got a little more texture in the shorter exposure. And that's what you're doing. You're looking at the different pieces of each image that you want to keep and the pieces of other images that you want to cover up. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now the first thing I'm going to show you is the way to create a quick key. So I'm going to be using F2 for my keyboard shortcut. And I do that because F2 in Photoshop was cut, and I don't really need that command on that key because I use the Control-C for that. So I've reallocated most of the function keys for the things that I use in my normal workflow. And for me, F2 is the creating a layer mask. So to do that, we come up to Edit and Keyboard Shortcuts and come into Layer, and scroll down. And then there's the new layer mask and hide all. And you just hit the F2 button to rename that as what you want for the F2 key. And what this is going to do is it's going to automatically create a layer mask and paint it black to hide it all. Because when you're using layer masks, what's black you don't see and what's white you will see. So the white parts of the layer mask are going to show through and the black is going to hide the other parts of the image, and it's not what you're going to see. So we've got our quick key set up. As long as you're on the layer that you want to apply the layer mask to, go ahead and hit F2, and now you can see that it has applied a new layer mask and filled it all in black. So toggling the eye on and off means that nothing changes because it has hidden this entire image from view. At this point, you'll take and come to your paintbrush. Make sure your paintbrush is set to white. And depending on what opacity you want, you'll change your opacity up here. For this, we're going to be using 100% because I really want it to take and show me everything on this longer exposure for this area. So paint that in just a little bit right in there, trying to blend it in right there. This one we're blending in just how that water looks right there on those little parts of the waterfall. It's just subtle. If you come in and turn off the shorter exposures that is the predominant image in this, you can see we're not using a lot of it yet. We're just using a little bit of it. Just using the parts that you like the most for that longer exposure. Like I said, I really liked the tails and the contrails of the water through here, and I liked that little sweeping motion there, but I liked the longer exposure here because that water was moving slower around that rock, and so the longer exposure smoothed that out a little bit more. So again, you can see we're not using a whole bunch of it. It's just selectively using pieces of one image on top of another. Obviously, it's very important to shoot these tripod mounted so that you don't have movement from one frame to the next. These were bracketed on a tripod, so in theory everything should stay very still and not have any movement, and you can see that I don't have any movement in the rocks, and I'm only changing the water flow. And so I can see here that I don't really like that I took this part of it, so I can come back in and just feather that out. If I want to change my opacity, I can come in and lightly paint it in just a little bit lighter. I'll work with my opacities anywhere from 15 to 100%. In this case, we'll come up to 50%, and we'll just keep some of that original exposure right here. I liked that separation of the white part of the water better against this darker rock. So it's just a matter of painting in what you want to see and changing the feel of an image cute little elements. And now we have this one that the leaves are all sharp over here and not moving. The leaves over here were not sharp in the longer exposure, but in the shorter one they're not moving as much, so they're sharper. And now we've blended in the parts of the long exposure into the shorter one that we like. And from this point forward, I would start doing all the rest of my edits. And the first thing I do in that case is select both images and Shift Control Alt E on Windows and Shift Command Option E on a Mac computer. And that will blend those two layers together so that you can turn them off and you can see that you have your final image ready for the rest of your editing. I always try to do this blending first. Don't wait till the end, do it first. That way your later edits are all built upon that already blended image. So I'll, at this point, go through the rest of my edits on this image and then export it for viewing however it's going to be viewed. And that's pretty much the very simple explanation of the how of a layer mask and the how of creating a quick key. And since I use quick keys for so much of my work, I've just set up a whole bunch of them, and it's the tasks that I use a lot. Sharpening, converting to 8-bit, color space, all of those, I have set up quick keys for them. And I encourage you to learn what commands and functions you use a lot and set up your own quick keys to help speed up your workflow. Well, I hope you like that little midweek treat on layer masks. If you like what you saw tonight, please hit that like button, leave me a comment. Let me know I'm doing a good job. It means a lot to me to know that the videos I'm putting out are helping somebody or that people are getting something out of them. If I'm not doing a good job, hey, tell me that too. Tell me it was silly to put all those layers of masks on. I couldn't understand a word you were saying. Just let me know how I'm doing. I appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.